18 cents. That's how much it cost to feed a single cowboy for an entire day on the most legendary cattle drives in American history. 18 cents. Less than a postage stamp today. And with that tiny budget, one cook fed 10 hungry, exhausted, sunburned men across 2,000 miles of empty wilderness for 3 straight months. No grocery stores, no restaurants, no refrigeration. Just a wooden wagon, an open fire, and 6 simple foods that built the American West. This is the story of the chuck wagon system, the food operation that fed the cowboys who shaped a nation. Let's go back to around 1866, the American frontier. The Civil War has just ended, Texas is broke, but Texas has one thing nobody else has: millions of wild longhorn cattle roaming free across the plains. These cattle are nearly worthless in Texas, but up north, in cities like Chicago and Kansas City, they're worth 10 times more. The problem is getting them there. So Texas ranchers do something insane. They decide to drive massive herds of cattle, sometimes 3,000 animals at a time, across 2,000 miles of unsettled wilderness, through deserts, through rivers, through Native American territories, through tornadoes and blizzards, all the way to the railroad towns in Kansas. This was the legendary cattle drive era, and it could not have happened without one man, the chuck wagon cook. In 1866, a Texas rancher named Charles Goodnight had a problem. His cowboys were starving on the trail. So Goodnight took an old military supply wagon, rebuilt it from the ground up, and created the world's first mobile kitchen on wheels. He added storage drawers for flour, sugar, and coffee. He built a fold-down work table at the back where the cook could prepare meals. He added barrels for water and a toolbox for cooking equipment. The chuck wagon was born. But the wagon was just the start. The real genius was the food system that ran inside it. Goodnight and other trail bosses had to figure out how to feed 10 men for 3 months on a brutal budget. They couldn't carry fresh vegetables, they couldn't carry meat for long, so they narrowed it down to 6 core foods. 6 ingredients that could feed an entire cattle drive crew from Texas to Kansas. 6 foods that cost almost nothing but provided everything a working cowboy needed. The first food was sourdough. Not regular bread, sourdough, because sourdough doesn't need commercial yeast. The cook would carry a small jar of sourdough starter, a living mixture of flour and water full of wild yeast that he kept alive for the entire trip. Some chuck wagon cooks had starters that were years old, passed down from cook to cook. Every morning, the cook would mix flour, water, salt, and a scoop of starter to make biscuits. He would bake them in a Dutch oven buried in hot coals. The result was hot, fresh, tangy biscuits every morning, anywhere in the wilderness. The sourdough starter was so important that cooks would sleep with it in cold weather to keep it warm. If the starter died, the entire crew lost their bread for the rest of the journey. The second food was bacon, salt-cured pork that could last for months without refrigeration. Bacon was the fat source of the cowboy diet. The cook would fry up bacon every morning, save the grease in a can, and use that grease to cook every other meal of the day. Nothing was wasted. The bacon itself provided salt, fat, and protein. The bacon grease became the cooking medium for biscuits, beans, and everything else. A single barrel of bacon could fuel a cattle drive for weeks. The third food was beans, specifically pinto beans. Dried pinto beans were nearly the perfect trail food. They lasted forever. They cost almost nothing. They packed massive amounts of protein and fiber. The chuck wagon cook would soak the beans overnight in a pot of water hanging from the wagon. Then he would simmer them all day on a low fire while the cowboys worked the herd. By evening, the beans were ready, often flavored with bacon grease and salt. Beans were so central to the cowboy diet that they earned the nickname prairie strawberries. A cowboy could eat them every night for 3 months and still be grateful. The fourth food was coffee. Strong, black, brutal coffee. Cowboys drank coffee like water, sometimes literally. On the trail, water sources could be muddy, polluted, or unsafe, but coffee was made by boiling water for several minutes, which killed bacteria and made it safe to drink. The cook would brew massive pots of coffee at every meal. Cowboys drank it scalding hot, no sugar, no cream, often 3 or 4 cups at a time. Coffee gave them caffeine for long days in the saddle. It warmed them on freezing nights. It kept them awake during dangerous night watches. Running out of coffee on the trail was considered a disaster worse than running out of food. The fifth food was cornmeal. Ground dried corn. Cornmeal was the backup grain when sourdough wasn't available. The cook could make cornbread, corn cakes, or thick cornmeal mush. It was cheap, filling, and lasted for months in dry storage. Some cooks mixed cornmeal with baking grease and salt to make quick, dense trail biscuits that could be eaten cold during the day while the cowboys rode. The sixth food was dried fruit, usually dried apples, peaches, or prunes. This was the only source of natural sweetness, vitamins, and fiber on the entire trail. The cook would stew dried fruit in water to make sweet, soft fruit compotes that cowboys would spoon over biscuits or eat as dessert. Dried fruit prevented scurvy, kept digestion working, and gave cowboys a small taste of luxury after weeks of beans and bacon. It was the small psychological win that kept morale alive on long, brutal drives. Together, these 6 foods cost the trail boss roughly 18 cents per cowboy per day in 1870s money. Sourdough flour, bacon, beans, coffee, cornmeal, and dried fruit. That was the entire food budget. For a working man doing 14 hours of hard labor in the saddle, in burning sun, freezing rain, and constant danger, and somehow on this incredibly cheap diet, cowboys stayed strong, energetic, and able to push thousands of cattle across thousands of miles. Now here's where the chuck wagon cook becomes a legend. The cook, often called Cookie or Koozie, was the second most important man on the drive after the trail boss. He woke up at 3 a.m. every morning. He had hot biscuits, bacon, beans, and coffee ready by 4 a.m. He fed all 10 men. He cleaned up. He packed the wagon. He drove the wagon ahead of the herd to the next camp. He set up camp before the cowboys arrived. He cooked dinner. He cleaned up again. For 3 months straight, the chuck wagon cook worked harder than any cowboy on the drive. And the rules around the chuck wagon were almost sacred. No cowboy was allowed to touch the cook's tools. No one tied a horse to the wagon. No one ate before the cook called everyone to dinner. If a cowboy disrespected the cook, the trail boss would punish him severely. Why? Because if the cook quit, the entire drive failed. If the cook ran out of supplies, men starved. The chuck wagon cook held the life of the entire crew in his hands. And here's the part that completely changes American history. Without the chuck wagon system, the great cattle drives would have been impossible. Without the cattle drives, Texas wouldn't have recovered after the Civil War. Without Texas cattle reaching northern markets, American cities like Chicago wouldn't have become the meatpacking giants they became. Without those markets, the American beef industry wouldn't exist as we know it today. 6 simple foods packed into a wooden wagon didn't just feed cowboys, they built the modern American economy. And here's something almost nobody talks about. The chuck wagon influenced modern American cuisine in ways most people don't realize. Sourdough bread became famous in San Francisco partly because of trail cooks bringing the technique west. Beans and bacon evolved into modern American comfort food. Strong black coffee became the American standard. Cornbread became a Southern staple. The basic flavor profile of American cowboy cuisine, born on the chuck wagon, is still alive in barbecue joints, diners, and steakhouses across the country today. So the next time you sit down to a plate of bacon and beans, biscuits and coffee, or cornbread and stewed apples, remember this: you're not just eating breakfast. You're eating the food that built the American West, the food that fed legendary cowboys across thousands of miles of nothing. If this story amazed you, hit that subscribe button and join the Alternate Past family for more forgotten history like this. And tell me in the comments, could you survive 3 months on a cattle drive, eating sourdough, bacon, beans, coffee, cornmeal, and dried fruit? Yes or no?